Hello and greetings, Swampers, as we have a Wednesday installment here in the virtual swamp. And for today, disregard what you see on your screen because we're going to have a pop quiz. That's right, we're going to have a pop quiz right here, right now, right this second. April Fools, gotcha. All right. So, anyway, ladies and gents, today we're going to build on what we did yesterday as we launched the road to revolution. All right, with the proclamation of 1763. And then you guys completed an IXL assignment yesterday, which, in my opinion, did a really nice job of introducing some of the different British policies and taxes that will serve almost as speed bumps, I like to call them, on the road to revolution. So there are going to be all these different British policies and taxes that the British government is going to enact on the American colonists, which is going to cause friction. Every time the British government hands down a new policy or a new tax, it's just going to cause more frustration, more resentment, and more anger. So that's what we're going to continue looking at today. So, ladies and gents, let's get after it. Here we go. Hands up, nice and high, everybody. Clocking in and down. Previously in the swamp. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun. All right, so ladies and gents, all right, that is our theme for the next few lessons is this idea of British action, colonial reaction. So everything that the British government is going to do, everything that the king is going to allow the British parliament to do, the colonists are going to react to it. All right. And this was a question I wanted you to think about yesterday. And that was, what do you typically do when you feel you're being treated unfairly? So many of us looked at this proclamation of 1763. We said, wait a second, that's unfair. How dare the king just strip that land from the colonists who fought long and hard to earn the chance to live in that land? And how dare he not accept the land claims of these colonists and not give them a refund and just literally steal money from them because he didn't um, allow their land claims to stick. All right. So I asked you guys, when you're treated unfair, well, what do? Do you accept it and say nothing? Very few of you said that. Calmly present your grievances to the person treating you unfairly. Many of you took that approach, but probably the most popular of the answers was to angrily confront the person treating you this way. And I find when we do this debate in the classroom and we talk about it and have a class discussion, I always find that angrily confront the person treating you is the most common answer. But I also think it's because a lot of you guys consider that the person treating you unfairly is somewhat of a peer, a friend, someone you go to school with, or a sibling. So you don't have that much concern about flipping out and getting angry and getting in somebody's face and yelling at them. So I always flip the script and I said, well, what if it was an authority figure? What if it was a teacher? What if it was a coach? What if it was a police officer who you feel is treating you unfairly? And I find that many of you shift your answers from angrily confronting to sometimes calmly presenting, but most times to just accepting it. So if it's a coach who you think is not giving you the proper playing time, a lot of you guys don't have the bravery and the courage to go up to that coach and let them know that you think that you are being unfairly passed over. If it's a teacher that you feel is unjustly treating you and being unfair and singling you out, a lot of you guys have problems talking to that teacher about your feelings. So that was something that I was going to tell you is it's one thing to flip out on a peer, but it's totally different story when it's somebody who's in an authority figure type situation. But that was yesterday's question. This is today's question that you're going to answer following this screencast. And it's going to be a Flipgrid finisher for you. Something I want you to consider here is, should the colonists have to help Great Britain pay off the 140 million pound war debt that was accumulated during the French and Indian War? I mean, let's be honest here. The only reason why the Great Britain came over there in the first place is because the colonists couldn't handle their business and drive the French and natives out of the frontier so that they could have it all for themselves. So of course, Great Britain gets involved and they use whatever resources necessary to win this war, and because of it they rack up a huge debt. So should the colonists have to help shoulder that load? And secondly, should the colonists have to now start paying for protection that they received from the British government, military, and navy. The reason why nobody messes with the colonies is because nobody wants to mess with the mother country of Great Britain because they're the most powerful country in the world. So should the colonists now have to pay for this bodyguard service, this protection service? Just curious what you guys think about this. So think about what you want to say for these two questions and log me a Flipgrid finisher response following this video. So what do you think? And the question is, what do you think? It doesn't matter what you think, folks, because you know whose thoughts matter here, whose opinion matters? The king's, King George III. And he says he doesn't matter what you think, whether you think you should pay or not, because the king says the time for free protection and the time of being lightly taxed, the most lightly taxed people in all the empire, that time is up. That time is over. And how do I know? Because look at all this, all these different policies and taxations that the king is going to levy and that the parliament is going to levy on the North American colonists. Look at this one here. So it's going to start with the proclamation. It's going to head over to the writs of assistance, which are smuggling crackdown laws that we'll talk about. Sugar Act, which is going to be a tax on foreign refined sugars. Quartering Act, which is going to see the putting of British soldiers in and around colonial cities and homes. Something known as the Stamp Act, which is going to be a tax on all printed materials. The Declaratory Act, which is more of a statement or declarative reminder that the king and parliament have the right to make taxes and decisions for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. And lastly, the Townshend Acts, which is going to be a tax on a number of different imported items that we're going to be discussing. So these different British policies and taxes are going to break up over two screencasts here. All right, so let's get started now to make sure that you know exactly what these different policies and taxes are all about. It started with the proclamation in 1763. This is really the jumping off point here of Great Britain starting to make decisions that are really going to affect the lives of Native Americans, or excuse me, of the American colonists. Because remember, up until this point, there was a policy of salutary neglect where the colonists were really able to govern themselves as they wished. And now the king and British Parliament are going to be on top of them, all over them, because of this heavy debt that they're now in. So we know this is the movement restriction laws using the Appalachian Mountains that forbids colonial settlement west of the Appalachians. We know why the British did it. We know they wanted to avoid conflict and save money. We know that they wanted to keep the colonists pinned to the East Coast to ensure a market for English goods. And we know that they wanted to get their greedy little hands on the fur trade in the frontier all for themselves. But we also know that the colonists are going to be angered by this proclamation because the West is being closed off to their settling. And we also know that many colonists are just going to flat out ignore the British government and they're going to just pour into the frontier anyway. But they're going to be angry though because their land claims are going to be ignored by the British government, which will result in lost investments and lost money. But this is not enough for the mother country to recoup that money. That is a huge debt from the French and Indian War. So they're going to attempt to do something that they really haven't up until this point, and that is going to be tax the colonial settlements. And the first one of those taxes is known as the Sugar Act. And instead of me telling you about it, I'm going to let King of England do it himself.
My faithful subjects in the American colonies, glory to Britain and her colonies. Our great empire has advanced its global stronghold through our splendid victory in the French and Indian War. We must now seek to regain economic strength, given the enormous costs of this prolonged battle. To help recuperate the money spent on supplying you with troops to help win the war and expand your territories, British Parliament has recently passed the Sugar Act. This act will place a tax on sugar and molasses imported into the colonies. Now let me be clear. This act does not impose a direct tax on you as colonists. Instead, it requires merchants to pay tax on the sugar products they bring into the American colonies to sell. This system is consistent with the taxation laws that apply in our other colonial regions around the world. I thank you for your loyalty and obedience to the crown. May Britannia live long and prosper.
May Britannia live long and prosper. Yeah, right, King George III. Keep acting like your best interest is our best interest here in the colony. But what you just heard was called the Sugar Act. It was going to put a tax on foreign refined sugar and wine, and it's going to increase taxes on coffee, indigo, and certain kinds of wine. But essentially, it is trying to deal with the issue that many colonists, instead of getting their sugar and molasses from the British, they're choosing to get it from the French instead. And understand, if the colonists are buying French, who's not getting paid? Question mark. Well, the British, of course. So the British are trying to come up with ways to recoup that French and Indian War debt. And this is one of the ways that they're going to try to do it. They're going to jack up the price on foreign refined sugar and wine in an attempt to sell their own sugar and wine. So this is a way to try to convince colonists to pay the taxes instead of smuggling and trading illegally with the French. Of course, the colonists are going to be angered by this and they're going to say, our rights are being violated here. You can't do this. You have no right to tax for revenue, for money, without our consent. We did not give our approval to this tax. You did not give us an opinion or give us a say. Therefore, you are violating our rights. So we are going to boycott British goods until you fix this problem and you get rid of this tax. And wouldn't you know it, that this Sugar Act proved to be more trouble than it was worth. And the king had a certain dollar amount in his head that they were going to make off of the Sugar Act, and they didn't come nearly close to it. So the Sugar Act was a complete and utter failure. So the king and parliament go back to the drawing board and they come up with a new tax. This time, the Stamp Act.
To my loyal subjects in the American colonies, it has become evident that the Great British Empire needs more funds due to the large amount spent protecting you during the French and Indian War. The money gained from the Sugar Act was simply not enough. You are the most lightly taxed subjects of my great empire and must now start paying for your own protection. Therefore, I am enacting the Stamp Act. From now on, you must purchase a stamp for every single piece of paper you use. This shall include newspapers, wills, licenses, and playing cards. If you fail to follow this new law, you shall be sent to jail or fined. Do not forget that you are still subjects of Britain and must obey my laws.
So the evil empire strikes again, but this time with a tax called the Stamp Act. And as you just heard from that announcement by King George III, it's going to be a tax on all printed materials, newspapers, wills, playing cards, official court documents. And for these to be legal documents, you have to purchase a stamp that shows that the tax was paid. So this is a direct tax that the colonists had to pay to England. And this tax was created directly without their consent. So again, the colonists never gave their approval. And in their minds, this is a violation of their rights. But why are the British doing it? Again, to help pay for that war debt that was racked up during the French and Indian War, but also to make the colonists start paying for the protection that they've enjoyed for all these years without paying a dime. But now they're going to be asked to start paying for the protection of the British might, right? The British military, their navy, their army. So if they want to continue to be protected by the mother country, they got to start kicking in. And the colonists are not thrilled with this because they never gave their consent. They claim this is no taxation without representation. You're not giving us a seat at the table. We're not represented in Parliament. We don't have anybody there speaking out on our behalf. Therefore, this is illegal, they would argue. But they also took on some non violent forms of protest. They would write petitions showing that they were upset about it. They would protest outside of colonial shops and let British officials know that, again, that they were not happy with the Stamp Act. They would boycott British goods, which means they would refuse to buy British goods. Also, shopkeepers and merchants would sign up into non importation agreements, which means they would agree not to import goods from Great Britain, even if this hurt their own business interests. So Great Britain was going to get squeezed economically because of the Stamp Act, because of boycotts and non importation agreements. But also, many colonists took a more violent approach. Radical groups such as the Sons of Liberty, which was created by Sam Adams, organized violent protests where they destroyed British government property and destroyed British possessions. They also threatened and intimidated the lives of tax collectors and beat them up and tarred and feathered them. So they took a lot of violent actions too to show their displeasure with the Stamp Act. But in this case, they're also going to take a political response and create something known as the Stamp Act Congress. And the Stamp Act Congress was a group of 9 colonies that met in upstate New York that together, unitedly, wrote up a Declaration of Rights and Grievances in which they announced that Parliament lacks the power to tax the colonies because the colonies were not represented in Parliament. So the Stamp Act Congress boldly proclaims that the only people that could tax us are our own colonial governments. In Parliament, you have no right to tax us. So you have this growing discontent of the colonies, plus the economic success of the boycott of British goods. Next thing you know, you have British merchants and goods producers begging Parliament to repeal or cancel the Stamp Act because it's devastating their very own businesses. And believe it or not, British Parliament and King George III agree. And they're going to repeal and cancel the Stamp Act. So, huzzah, huzzah! It's a colonial victory for now. It's a colonial victory. Or is it? Tomorrow we shall find out what happens when the king strikes back and shows that he will not be pushed around by a bunch of colonial governments and a bunch of rebels that are causing mischief and mayhem in the colonies. But for now, we pause here on this topic and I take your attention to your Flipgrid assignment. It says, well, what do you think? I want you to reflect on those two questions that were being asked of you earlier in the screencast and cut a Flipgrid response video with your thoughts. Please be sure to explain your reasoning with thorough explanation. So what do you think? 2 questions that I want you to consider. Should the colonists have to help Great Britain pay off the £140 million war debt accumulated during the French and Indian War? First question. Second question, should the colonists have to pay for the protection that they receive from the British government / military / Navy? Looking forward to hearing your voices again. Looking forward to seeing you again. All right. So if you have any questions, again, email, private comment. Otherwise, have a great day and looking forward to your awesome video responses. Have a great day, everybody.